Any bad questions?
There are sometimes. I
Okay,
don't
well
point it
here,
out,
let me
though.
try one of them then.
Go ahead.
How exactly do you address a letter to the Iranian Supreme Leader?
Well, Matt, I think you're referring to reports.
Oh, this is apropos of nothing. I'm just curious. If you were going to write a letter to the Supreme Leader of Iran, how would you address it?
Well, I have never written a letter to the Supreme Leader of Iran, so I don't have a good answer for you to that question.
Has there been any communication between senior people in this government, including elected leaders, and the Supreme Leader? Correspondence?
Matt, I think you're referring to reports about a letter from the president, which I'd certainly refer you to the White House on.
Thanks, Josh. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the president sent a letter last month to Iran's Supreme Leader talking about the shared interest that the U.S. and Iran has in the fight against the Islamic State. Can you confirm that that letter was sent?
I'm not in a position to discuss private correspondence between the president and any world leader. I can tell you that the policy that the president and his administration have articulated about Iran remains unchanged. The United States is engaged in conversations with Iran in the context of the P5+1 talks to resolve the international community's concerns about Iran's nuclear program. And we have also discussed on the sidelines of those talks on at least a couple of occasions the ongoing campaign that is being conducted against ISIL by the United States and 60 members of, or now more than 60 members who are part of this broader coalition. The United States will not cooperate militarily with Iran in that effort. We won't share intelligence with them. But their interest in this outcome is something that's been widely commented upon, and something that on a couple of occasions has been discussed on the sidelines of other conversations.
But since we know that there has been communication between the U.S. and Iran on this matter, why can't you say if that communication happened at the level of the president and the Supreme Leader?
Just because I'm not in a position to talk about private correspondence that may
that there was a letter sent?
I'm not going to be in a position to talk about private correspondence between the president and another world leader.
Okay.
Do you know, has there been communication? That we know, and it's been you've been pretty open about, at least since last November, contact between the president and the Iranian president, as well as
The
secretary
and
and the foreign minister have been meeting quite openly, not in secret at all, for a year now. Are you aware of any attempt to correspond with or communicate with the Supreme Leader, other than the previous letters that the president has sent to him, which apparently have not gotten any response?
I don't have any more information, no.
So
I then send a secret letter to the Ayatollah when Congress is saying we want a voice in these nuclear talks, for example, that we don't want to be cut out. If you're sending a secret letter, it sounds like you're not being transparent and you're cutting Congress out.
I recognize that it may sound that way, but the fact of the matter is there are also secret conversations between the administration and Congress about our negotiating strategy with Iran. I'm not going to detail those secret conversations either, but I am in a position to tell you that senior administration officials have been and continue to be in very close touch with relevant members of Congress about the progress that we're making on these P5+1 talks.
Together would go much smoother if you also said up front that Congress is going to be able to vote and approve this, rather than you might read them in after you cut a deal.
Well, again, I'm not saying that we're going to read them in after we cut a deal. I'm saying that we've been reading them in as we've been trying to negotiate this deal. Again,
This letter was allegedly written in part to bring Iran in to help fight ISIS beyond the nuclear deal. And President Rouhani told CNN in an interview last month that he thinks the airstrikes so far against ISIS have been a form of theater, and it's not a serious campaign against terrorists. So my question is, how can the president believe that Iran is a credible partner here when they're attacking his campaign against ISIS and saying it's not serious?
well, I mean, just as a factual matter, the fact is, that we have seen the airstrikes that have been conducted by the United States and many of our coalition partners actually have an impact on their ability to operate in this area of the world. We've seen them change their tactics. There's a story in the New York Times today about how the success that ISIL the momentum that ISIL had built up had waned in recent months, in part due to the military campaign that the United States and our coalition partners is waging against them. So as a factual matter, that's what you say he said is not true.
It is correct, and I'd have no reason to believe that it isn't correct, that what you said, we are all familiar with the Supreme Leader's political influence. Wouldn't it make sense for U.S. officials to be in touch with the Supreme Leader about something as big as a potential nuclear deal? And if it were, I mean, can you answer?
I'm not going to speculate on that, Matt. Obviously,
I'm not asking you to speculate.
Every participant in these negotiations goes back to their capitals. There's different
Right.
meetings for that depending on the countries, and we'll leave it at that.
Well, and I'm just wondering if one accepts that it might be the responsible thing to do if one is really trying to get the Iranians to agree and then implement an agreement, if it's a responsible thing or an intelligent thing to do to be in touch with the guy who actually makes the final decisions here, why do it? How does it make sense to do it secretly?
I'm not going to speculate on reports or more on.
I mean, the guy has a Twitter account. You could, just fire off a tweet. You could follow him and DM him messages if you wanted it to be secret.
Twitter is typically not how we conduct diplomacy, but
but I thought it was.
It's
I mean,
a
that
tool,
whole
but
hashtag
typically
diplomacy.
through private conversations.
Hey,
Matt.
Ayatollah, can't you? I don't understand why the administration would think that it is a bad idea or not worthwhile to try to be in touch with the Supreme Leader if he is going to be making the final decision on whether Iran accepts an agreement or not.
I didn't suggest that, Matt. I just suggested I have nothing more for you.
Make sure, in the context of the negotiations that are going on and any possible correspondence there may or may not have been between the President and the Supreme Leader, it remains the U.S. position that Iran still is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Is that not correct?
That has not changed. I just
And
think I just expressed
there
a
are some
concern about state sponsorship of terrorism.
Okay, and that there are serious human rights issues that you have
Correct.
with that.
That has not changed.
On your consulting and with Congress, how is that going? I mean, it seems like nobody in Congress and even fewer people, if that's possible, in the new Congress actually approve of what you're doing.
I wouldn't agree with that, Matt. I think obviously members of Congress, as they have from the beginning, are free to voice their views, but I think most members of Congress don't want to see Iran acquire a nuclear weapon. Obviously, the deal will be judged by the details of the deal, and so that's what we encourage members of Congress to wait to assess.
But you say most members of Congress don't want to see Iran with a nuclear weapon. I think that it probably applies to all members of Congress,
Fair.
right? But none of them, or I haven't heard any of them. Maybe I'm missing someone in here. None of them, even Democrats, even lawmakers from the president's own party, are supportive of the way things look like they're going right now.
Well, again, there's no deal until everything is agreed, and obviously we're not at that point, so there's nothing to officially assess.
Okay, and last, the administration's position is that objections from members of Congress to this agreement can't stop you from doing it, right?
Well, that's an oversimplification. We're going to be...
But it's the truth, isn't it?
No, it's not the truth. We're going to be consulting with Congress, as we have been, about any details and what it looks like and what's required.
But when you come back, you go and show them the deal, or parts of the deal, because I'm still not sure anyone's seen the entire JPOA agreement. But, and they say, well, we don't like this. You're going to go ahead and do it anyway, right?
Well,
I mean,
the negotiators need to have room. They've always needed to have room to negotiate. That remains the case
but they
today.
can't stop you. Your position is they can't stop you from agreeing to a deal with Iran.
Well, Matt, the negotiators will agree to the deal, I think, with the objective and the trust of knowing that they will not agree to a deal that doesn't prevent
But
Iran
your
from
position
acquiring a
is
nuclear
that
weapon.
Congress can't stop you from doing a deal.
I'm not going to assess
Right?
it further.
No?
Go ahead.
I just want to ask that the United States presented a framework to Iran, which to help the Iranians meet their peaceful energy needs.
Well,
Okay. So that suggests that there is one single document that is now ready and put forward to the Iranians, which has not been the case. Has always been there's no deal until everything's agreed. And in your response to Nicola, you mentioned documents, several documents. So is there one document now that you and the P5+1 have agreed on, which is before the Iranians to decide on?
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, but let me try to make it a little more clear. From the beginning, the P5+1 has put forth creative and reasonable proposals that are equitable, enforceable, and consistent with our own core objectives, and consistent with Tehran's expressed desire for a viable civilian nuclear program. That's been ongoing. Beyond that, I'm not going to assess for you how many documents or proposals are being discussed.
Given that we're now less than 3 weeks from the November 24th deadline, it would seem perhaps tardy that there isn't one document that you're now talking about.
I'm not confirming one way or the other how many documents there are, because we want to keep the notion of the nature of the discussions and negotiations private, because we think
Various U.S. officials have said that every country has a role. Now, in light of the report on the letter between President Obama and the Iranian leader, is it the assessment of the United States that the fight against ISIS can be accomplished, ISIS can be defeated without Iran's help even?
well, the Secretary has said every country has a role to play. I just outlined the role that they could play. We have remaining concerns about their military engagement. That hasn't changed. Beyond that, I'm not going to assess it further.
So that could be, the letter could be sort of an inducement for them not to kind of alleviate your concern about their military engagement, as you just mentioned.
I'm not going to talk about a letter that is reportedly coming from the President of the United States.